Greg, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm
Great to be here.
Really excited to talk about solutions and hope today.
Yep.
One of the things Aspen's known for is bringing together people who are good communicators about climate, right?
Yeah.
Why would you have a conference if everyone's going to sit around and be super wonky about the policy details? Why is that such an important part of this conference?
And I think bringing in a larger part of the population into these conversations about climate solutions is just so important because it's going to impact everybody, and people need to understand what those solutions look like, how those impacts are, and how they can talk about and understand what that looks like for them. And so it's not just that the wonky policy people in the Beltway in DC or in governments elsewhere, but it's about the companies, it's about the artists, it's about the chefs and the farmers that all need to be part of this. And so the more we're able to bring people into the conversation, I think the better off we're going to be.
What we hear from the academic literature, but also from just reactions from readers or audience members or just regular people you talk to, is I think most of the conversation about climate change has been A, very far away, or B, very depressing. We talk about doom and gloom all the time. How much do you think that's a part of how we communicate?
So I think it's been on the horizon, and it's been the what could go wrong. And I think now we're starting to pivot. What we're doing at Aspen Ideas Climate is talking about the solutions, talking about the optimistic scenario. What if we get it right? And what if we do a lot of the things that we need to do to be able to reduce emissions, to build resilient communities, to make sure people are prepared for, hurricanes are still gonna hit the coasts one way or another. And so how do we build communities that can withstand that better? And so if we can build that optimistic scenario that looks to a future where we've done a lot of the good things, then people can have hope, people can have a pathway that they can follow to solve climate change.
Yeah, that reminds me of this editorial cartoon I saw many years ago about climate change, and it was these people sitting in an audience, they were looking up at a stage, and there was a big globe and all this stuff, and one of them leans over and goes, what if climate change isn't real? What if we build a better world for nothing? And I think about that so often because so many of these solutions, like you mentioned, building a more resilient community, better building codes, putting solar on buildings as backup for hurricanes, those are solutions that harm no one. They are win-win. We know climate change is coming, but even if you were someone who didn't really understand the science yet, this is still like, electric cars reduce air pollution. You are breathing healthier and cleaner air in your community. How much do you think that's a part of the conversation?
Yeah, all of these solutions help make air cleaner, water cleaner. A lot of the issues with children's asthma has to do with things that are climate solutions will solve. And so I think personalizing it, and I think talking about it in a kind of a human health way also helps people understand, because it's you don't want to be breathing in dirty air. That's something that everyone can understand, and you don't want to be drinking dirty water. And so if the climate solutions that we're talking about can address that as well as actually reducing emissions, then that can be a real selling point. We work a lot between the US and India on sharing climate solutions and working together. And one of the ways we really got started in that was talking about the air quality in New Delhi and how reducing emissions from coal plants can help, and building more solar and wind can help make the air quality every day better for Indians across India. And then that will also reduce their emissions that they're putting into the atmosphere for climate change.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned personalizing. It's finding the issue that people connect with. I think Moms for Clean Air is a group that ended up doing a lot of cool climate policy, although they started out with how do we make sure our kids don't have their asthma flared up regularly. Yeah. And I feel like that's also a really important part of communicating climate in the local news world is not every single headline has to have climate change into it. Not every story is about how climate change is affecting Miami in the broad sense, but if you break it down, you're talking about, hey, the fish you love to go and catch every weekend, their habits and magnitude are changing because of ocean acidification, because climate change. And I feel like that's something I love when I use communication skills to write these stories is, what are you worried about and how does climate change affect that? Or flipping it to more positively, what would you love to see and how could some of these climate solutions help us get to that future, right?
Yeah. This was a couple years ago. I was talking to some farmers in Oregon about, I was just sitting at a bar and they were hops farmers. They grow the hops for beer. And they were just talking about how hot it had been getting in the valley that they were growing in. And, we didn't talk about climate change at all, but that's what they were talking about. And so I think you don't have to talk about climate change to understand the impacts and to understand the solutions. It impacts every aspect of life.
Yeah, and I think finding those connections is such a strong way to make those ties and build communities that care about a specific topic. But at the same time, there's like a balance, right? We want people to all care about the changes happening, but to make larger policies happen, we do need a majority of people to understand that it's caused by climate change, right? And science communication is so tough. It's tough for a million reasons, but I mean, have you read some of these studies about the people that citizens are more likely to trust, right? Like nurses, doctors, teachers. How does Aspen sort of look to maybe those professions or experts in those professions to bring in those trusted voices?
Yeah, so I think, at Aspen Ideas Climate, we had Al Roker. And weathermen are one of the most trusted, messengers in the U.S. And so, the person that you look to see what temperature it's going to be today and whether it's going to rain and you should bring your umbrella is, you can check that real quick by the end of the day of whether they were right or not. And so I think having someone like Al Roker or someone like Bill Nye, Katharine Hayhoe talk about climate change and climate solutions, it's really a way for people to understand and trust what they're hearing and get the facts for the solutions.
And definitely trusted repetitive communication, like whether people are absolutely, like, I mean, Miami, we have John Morales, who does really good climate communication that, he built off an audience of people who trusted him for his hurricane and his weather reporting. And then you go to Bill Nye, who's most people's original, most exciting science communicator. And if you've ever been in a room with him or watched his panels at Aspen, he's the same person on camera off. He is someone who comes at it, and I think what's interesting about the way he communicates is he just brings wonder and curiosity to it that I think is really, Katharine Hayhoe does this too. Dr. Hayhoe, when she's excited about something, like you feel that energy, even across watching it on a screen. And I mean, maybe is that just the magnetism of public speaking, or is that helping people connect to the message of climate change?
I mean, I think it's helping to inspire people to really internalize the message that they're conveying and to think about themselves in that position. And so that excitement, like whether it's Bill Nye or Katharine Hayhoe or Al Roker, they bring you into the story and they really, get you to personalize that with yourself. And so, I mean, I think that's so important. And I see, there are three really well-known names in the space, but I think you see other leaders, corporate leaders, you see government leaders that kind of have that same messaging, and it works really well. And it's very compelling to, to audiences who can then absorb that better.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're also the ones who are, I think Dr. Hayhoe does this well, telling a message of hope, of like, we know the problem, we know what the solutions are, we still have time to fix it. But she's also really good at saying, but we're not doing it right now. And I think sometimes when we talk about, looking at solutions, everybody wants solutions, but you want to verge away from ending up being too Pollyanna-ish, like, oh, tech will save us all. Like, there is an amount of political will and also hard work on our behalf we're all going to have to do to make our climate reality a positive one. And yeah, what part of that is the conversation?
So I think that is a big part of the conversation. At Aspen Ideas Climate, we cover a lot of different topics, clean energy, natural solutions, biotechnology, artificial intelligence. And we have to recognize that a lot of these solutions are going to contribute to solving climate change. A lot of them aren't. And we have to try them all to figure out what's actually going to work and what's not. And we have to accept that a bunch of them are going to be successful, and some of them we're going to have to put aside at some point if they show that they're not working, or they're not contributing as much, because we can still solve the climate crisis, but we're not on track to do it. And so holding those two different thoughts in our heads of, we need to run faster, but we also need to not burn ourselves out. If you're thinking about like a running metaphor or something, is a really important thing. And I I think the way we talk about technologies, natural solutions, policies, finance, things like that, really get at that.
Yeah, and these conversations, I mean, like we said, more solar, pretty clean. Some of these natural solutions are win-wins, right?
Yep.
But some of them do involve some trade-offs, and some of these solutions, like you just mentioned, especially in the energy world, involve, like, we don't know if they're going to work yet, and that it requires a lot of investment now, like carbon capture, hydrogen. Some of these things we don't know yet, and it requires like a leap of faith of saying, okay, we're going to throw a bunch of money into it and see what happens. And sometimes it works out, like with solar.
Yeah.
We put decades of investment and subsidies into solar, and it's paying off really well for us. And maybe wind too. I'm not as up to date on wind.
Yeah, both solar, wind, and batteries.
Yeah.
I mean, the cost has dropped so much over the last decade, and that's because of government investment. It's because of companies willing to kind of lean out a little bit and purchase things, and it helps bring down the price. And so now we're seeing that, we're seeing investments in hydrogen, we're seeing investments in EV charging, getting people more comfortable with these new fuels. We're working on decarbonizing the marine shipping sector.
Yeah.
And the companies that own the ships, they want to be able to use new fuels, but they don't necessarily want to, be out front and be the first ones. And the ones that are willing to, do that are really going to succeed in the future because they're willing to kind of test things out and see what works.
Right, and then they get to carry those benefits back to their shareholders and to their employees on the cleaner ships that are spewing less pollution.
Right.
There's so many, like we said, multi-level benefits you can carry back, but it does take bravery.
Yeah.
And I think that's also been a theme I've heard at Aspen Ideas Climate for the last few years is like you need private industry and government to be brave and take those steps.
Yeah, and that's where it's, I think the theme for the next decade is really going to be the private sector and local government building and enacting and financing the things that we actually need built. The big international, conversations and the federal conversations are important, but solar panels and wind turbines and batteries and EV charging happen in cities, in towns, in people's homes, and they're built by companies. And so those two players coming together are really going to be the next generation of climate leaders. And the ones that are bold, that are forward-leaning are going to be the ones that benefit because they'll really take a big stake in the future, and that'll be to their benefit.
Right, it's like building a house that's already equipped to carry solar and doesn't have natural gas in it. It may be expensive now, but you don't have to do those retrofits when everybody else has to meet you in 10 years.
Right.
You are already ahead of the game.
Right, especially in the US where there's so many tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act that people can access.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think, obviously it's meant to turn industry, right? We want to increase investment, domestic solar production. We want to see, cleaner marine ecosystems. We want to see a lot of these big changes, but also there was a lot of money in IRA for individual action.
Yeah.
And how do you balance, like, the knowledge that we need to see these industries make big moves and the top 100 the top 100 companies do the most polluting in the world sort of thing versus it does matter if you choose to use a reusable plastic water bottle, or it does matter if you carpool instead of drive, or who you vote for. How do you balance, like, we need to see big shifts and also individual action?
It's a little like if you've ever done an improv class, yes and. We need the big action. We need individuals to make individual choices, and together all of those things are going to add up to change. We can't just pick one. We've got to have all of the different options. And one person getting an EV or putting solar panels on their house isn't going to solve climate change. But 10 million people getting EVs or getting solar panels or purchasing renewable power from their utility, or choosing, I started riding a bike to work a couple days a week last year, and it's both good exercise and I'm emitting less carbon on my commute. And so, like, people can choose to do that, and not everyone can choose to ride a bike to work. I mean, that's obviously like I'm fortunate to be able to do that, but those are the things that we have to do, and it's going to take all of that together to make this happen.
Right, and like you said, some of these individual choices are not accessible to everyone, but they also don't all involve buying things. You can choose to carpool with a friend. You can choose to take a train instead of flying somewhere. You can choose to eat differently, or just recycle your plastic better and make sure you're really on it. And there's so many individual choices you can do that do not involve consumption.
Yeah. And I think it's up to policymakers to make those choices easy for people.
Right.
Because if it's really hard to recycle your plastic bottles or to buy non-plastic, whatever it is you're buying that isn't in plastic instead of is in plastic, then people are really gonna, usually take the easiest path, like water, and they're not gonna make those changes. But if they make it easy, or if they make it beneficial, like the tax credits that we mentioned, people will choose that.
Or the rebates for choosing new appliances that are more energy efficient, or heat pumps instead of an HVAC unit. And I think when I talk to people about individual action, that's exactly what you just said is what I hear all the time, which is, I would love to make better choices. They are not available to me. And I think that's part of what drives some people to feel a little helpless about climate change. And that's why when I hear about the doom and gloom narrative, don't be a bummer, make sure you talk about solutions and hope. Yes, people are desperate for it. Everyone I know wants to solve climate change. They want to live in a better world, and they want to live in a better world for themselves and their whole community, and they need to be empowered by governments and private industry to allow those choices to be easier to make, because they'll take them if they're available.
And a lot of those choices, if you think about when somebody buys a new heater or air conditioner, it's usually when their old one breaks and they have, it's summer and it's 100 degrees and they have to make a decision now. And so you want them to be able to make that climate smart choice, even under that pressure of having to make a decision today, so they're not, sweating in their house the next couple of days. And so it's really about education and talking about those choices ahead of time, instead of defaulting to our what we would have done in past.
Yeah, and education, that's where we come right back around, close the circle to making sure everyone knows. You have to know that those options are available. The salesperson has to know how to openly talk about the benefits and yes, this costs a little more, but your overall running costs will be lower every year. Yes, it uses less energy. Yes, it works more efficiently. You're cutting your carbon emissions, and be able to talk about that with you. And then we need those tax credits to make them comparable price-wise, and then we get to see consumer choice that follows in that vein we're looking for, right? It's all got to work together. Got you. And how do you talk about individual action a lot at Aspen this year? I feel like I've seen some of that, especially in the plastic world, has come up a lot.
Yeah, so we have some sessions on individual action, including how to think about your retirement or your investments and how you can do that in a climate smart way. And we've balanced that with kind of the big policy, big technology actions, and tried to create a suite of sessions and conversations around both ends of the spectrum there.
Got it. Yeah, the financial footprint is something that I think a lot of people haven't even begun to start that conversation yet. So you're a forefront of that. But yeah, there's so much to learn and there's so much to know. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time today talking about this. What a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.